Good morning, everybody. That sounded almost awake. Hopefully we'll be more awake by the time this is done, because there's nothing more exciting than an early morning talk on opportunity zones. Yeah! There we go. Thank you, everyone, for making it out. I love Milwaukee. It's a beautiful town. If it's your first time being here, you're absolutely going to love it. I'm excited to see so many new folks. As Rob mentioned, my name is John Cruz. I live in St. Louis, and I'm here because this is really important stuff, right? We have a lot of funders that got questions. We have investors that have questions. We have people that are wondering, what is the role of data partners as we talk about opportunity zones? That's after we get past the question like, what is opportunity zones? What are they? What can we do? How can we make this stuff work? And so our job today is to try to get through a lot of that, talk through quite a bit, and see if we can all come away from all this stuff today being really excited about knowing how we can have this work be impactful and all the other things that are going to actually matter as far as making things happen in our cities. So I got a couple pamphlets with me today. Unfortunately, Eric from Kresge couldn't be here with us. So we got Brett, say hi to Brett, and we got Jeff with a G, say hi to Jeff with a G. And they're both really fantastic people, experts in their field, and I'm really excited to see what they have to say. So what we're going to do is we're going to get started with a presentation from Brett, kind of talking everything through. After that's done, we'll do a little bit of Q&A, and we'll kind of go back and forth with that kind of format throughout everything that we're doing here. Any questions, comments, concerns before we get started? No? Good? Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Brett.
Good morning, everyone. This is actually my 5th NNIP conference, but I haven't been here in 10 years, so I have considerably more children and considerably less hair. But I think it also means that since it's been 10 years, I don't know most of you anymore, but I can see some familiar faces, which is great. I have the, I think, unenviable task of trying to compress what opportunity zones are into 10 minutes. So I'm going to do the high-level overview. We're going to have some Q&A. There'll probably be some things that are still, maybe going to be cleared up, but we're going to press through as best we can. So, what are they? I think the best way to begin to understand it is by talking through the process. So, first, you are a taxpayer, and a very fortunate one, because you have capital gains. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but most people in this country do not have any material amount of capital gains. So we're talking about the very top end, that if you have sizable capital gains that you want to be investing. But you realize that. You sold a building that you had bought that appreciated by a lot, or you sold some stock in, I'll say Microsoft, since Microsoft is in the room and has done very well. And so you've got your gain. What are you going to do with it? So this is an incentive to get you to realize your gains. That is to cash out, realize your gain, and do something with it. So you take your gain and you put it in a qualified opportunity fund. You get 6 months to do that. Then the fund makes an equity investment, and that is important that it's an equity investment, not a debt investment, into a business, broadly defined. And they have 31 months plus a few things to actually get the money into the ground. And they have to keep at least 90% of it in. So by some estimates, there are $6 trillion in unrealized capital gains. It's not that all of these are at all going to flow through this structure, but the point is there could be a considerable amount of money flowing through these structures. This was passed as part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. It existed in previous form before that, but it was kind of slipped in at the last minute to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, really without much discussion along the way. Okay, so what are the actual benefits you get if you decide to take your gains and put them into a fund and make them a business? So there are 2 types that relate to the money you already earned, the previous gains. And then there's 1 type of benefit that relates to the next step, what your money will do after you make that investment. So try to understand just quickly, and I know we're not probably corporate finance experts in this room or real estate finance, but I think it's important to have at least a sense of how these 2 differ, because how they're going to play out in your city's neighborhoods are going to be affected by the actual mechanics of the incentive. So first off, the money that you got when you sold that building or you you sold your stock. Do you want to pay tax on it now, or do you want to pay tax on it later? Well, procrastination's always better, right? Because money is worth less, 7 years later than it is today. And you could do something with that money in the meantime. So the first step is just hit the snooze button. You got a temporary deferral. You don't owe the tax that you would have owed when you realized the capital gain until 2026. So that's a relatively modest incentive, but not nothing for an investor. The second one, this is still relating to the money that you already earned, the capital gains you already have realized. This says, well, would you like to pay tax on all 100% of your earnings, or would you like to pay tax on less than 100% of your earnings? So this is saying, of your capital gains, we're just going to pretend that 10% didn't happen if you hold your investment for 5 years, or if you hold it for 7 years, that 15% didn't happen. You're just not going to be taxed on everything you had a gain on. We're just going to take part of that away and pretend like that didn't happen from a tax perspective. You'll be taxed on the remaining 85 or 90%. So those two components put together are, some people are estimating between 300 and 400 basis points, so 3 to 4% of return, so internal rate of return that you could get as an investor for making this investment. So you could think if most investors want somewhere 12 or 15% rate of return for their investment, maybe they're getting 3 to 4 of that from these financial structures. So that's not nothing. That's also not enough. Closer to the microphone.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. I'll just punch over a little bit.
You can take it out.
Is that better? All right. Okay, so you've got your temporary deferral, your step-up in basis. Those are relatively certain and knowable how to cost that out as an investor and what you're going to get from it. But they're also relatively modest in scope. They're probably not the reason why we are up here today and why we are a session at NNIP. So the reason that we're probably up here today in a session and why you're hearing about this in your cities is the third element, and that is that there is a permanent exclusion on new gains. So what I've been talking before is you already earned your money. How much tax do you owe from what you earned? Now this is saying you made a new investment. If you hold that investment for 10 years, you don't owe any tax on the new capital gains. So this is potentially enormous. This also, though, is highly speculative. You don't really know how that real estate investment is going to look 10 years from now. You don't really know how that investment in operating business is going to look for 10 years from now. So this is a really big deal, maybe. It depended on what it is that you're actually going to get. Okay, so let me walk through some ways that opportunity zones are similar and different from other community development tools that you may be more familiar with. So first, a large segment of the country was eligible. So 56% of the nation's census tracts. They started with the new markets, eligible tracts, and they added some ones that were adjacent to them. So as you can imagine, that's a lot of the country, not just the most distressed parts of the country. And then governors got to pick 25% of the eligible tracts in their state and nominate them as zones. Now in practice, some governors just made those picks. Some governors said, oh, you, city of Chicago, have X% of the population of Illinois. You tell me which zones you want. You have X number of zones. So it played out differently across the states. Most of Puerto Rico was actually designated as a zone. We got an exception. Okay, there's not an intermediary in the same way that we see it with the new market tax credit or with the low-income housing tax credit, with the state housing finance agency playing a key role. There's not a cap on total taxpayer subsidy. There's not a competitive application process. There are lots of possible uses, but real estate, I expect, will be the largest use case. There is not likely to be an even distribution of investment across zones. You can think of this in some ways better as an incentive than as a subsidy. And those are words that you may not have thought of altogether different, but especially given the speculative nature of the back end, the permanent exclusion, it's an incentive to do something. You're not really guaranteed that. And so an abiding question that I have is how many more deals would pencil out that wouldn't have already? Versus how much subsidy will we be providing as taxpayers to projects that already haven't. And it especially is a question mark that I have and a concern. Sometimes anecdotes work the best to convey. I was in Miami. I know we got Miami partners here. I was in Miami this spring and presented before the county council and was speaking with some developers there, one of whom had made a verbal offer on a property for $19 million. And the regs came out that were more favorable to investment, and the person owning the property said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to sell it to you after all. I'm going to sell it to this opportunity fund that's going to give me $31 million for my property. Now, a couple of observations from this anecdote. One, the opportunity fund may well have overpaid. But two, and there is feeling like froth in this environment, but two, it is an important question of where the benefit of this tax deferral and exclusion is going. And in some respect, if markets are perfectly efficient, we would expect the value to capitalize within land values already. So, in some of your communities that are zoned, they already may be more expensive. It may not be something that's going to play out later. Now, things will be different because this incentive is more attractive in places that are appreciating, because that's where we have more capital gains creation that can be excluded. And so I do expect the dynamics to be pretty different in different communities. Okay, so we've got some proposed regs that have come out. The first tranche was in October of 18. We just had the next tranche a couple of weeks ago. And basically everything that Treasury has done across all of the proposed regs is to widen the aperture to make this an even bigger and more attractive program. There's some funny debate in Washington about the nomenclature of whether this is a program or not, and Treasury has very clearly articulated it is not a program, it is an incentive. It is a provision in the tax code, it is not a program. I'm actually using the word program still because, in a sense, I'm aspirationally articulating that I want them to administer this more as a program. Okay, so a couple other things. I'll run through these quickly on the proposed regs. So, again, 31 months, but you have more if you're waiting for a permit. So that was another provision they added, and the clock starts with each new contribution to a deal. Opportunity funds can invest in multi-asset vehicles and then dispose of those assets. So you will get examples where I spoke with one gentleman who was making a $400 million investment along the lake in Indiana with his own money, his own gains. He was one investor, one opportunity fund, one project. So you'll see those kind of very simple structures that emerge in your communities. But you will also see the BlackRocks and the Merrills and the whomevers of the world create almost REIT-style holdings of properties and opportunity fund investments that are many investor, many projects. So it will be both kind of scenarios that we see playing out. There's some requirements about how much property the business has to hold in the zone. There are over 8,700 zones. So the zone is a census tract across the country. And you have to have a certain amount of income from a business to be operating in the zone. Leased property is eligible as an investment, but not triple net leases alone. And owned property, you do have to do something to see it approved. I was speaking with staff from one of the senators that was sponsoring this initial legislation before this was law, as well as some of the people backing it. And I said, well, what if you're just encouraging people to sit on a parking lot and then 10 years later sell it? Like, are you really going to encourage new and material investments into properties? And the answer was yes. We will accommodate that by requiring substantial improvements to the properties. So that's what's in the statute. But what Treasury has articulated is actually weakening or broadening that. You don't have to count the value of the land in the calculation of whether you made a substantial improvement. So just the improvements on the land, did you improve? And you don't have to calculate that in the same way if structures have been vacant for a certain amount of time or land is unimproved. So there's some ways that this has been made easier for real estate investment. Okay, so I'm wrapping up. Is that a better mic? All right. Now that I'm done. Okay. So we've got maps. I just thought I'd show you Milwaukee because we're here. So here are your zones, your census tracts. And here's a resource page with some research briefs that we've put out, some data, tract level data, some state level summaries, logs. We've put in 2 rounds of public comments to Treasury on the program, and some summaries from events that we're doing, that we have done and will do in the community. So let me pause there and see if there's clarifying questions, and then we're going to have a round of discussion about what philanthropy can do, what cities can do, and what some of the other decision factors are about disease. But let me pause for a clarification question.
Thank you very much. So at this point, y'all know more than 99% of the United States citizens on what opportunity zones are, but that doesn't mean there aren't lots of burning questions in our hearts and minds. So at this point, we're going to turn everything over to the audience. Let's see. Gentlemen right there staring at me. What do we got going on? You number 1, Janet number 2.
Okay. So clarifying question on the timeline. You mentioned that for the speculative benefit, it's 10 years. Am I correct in understanding that that incentivizes investment in the fund like at the end of this year, December of 19, or when is that?
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't say that. That would have been good to add. So the temporary deferral ends by 2026 per statute. So you have to pay your tax on your previous gains by at least 2026. And the same for the 5-year and 7-year step up and basis that discount on how much you owe from that. I will say, however, there are already proposals in Congress about moving 2026 to 2027. And if that doesn't stick, why not 2028 and 2029? So this is a moving, it could be a moving dynamic depending on Congress. But the permanent exclusion, you have until midway through 2028 to make that investment. So even if you don't take advantage of the temporary deferral and the step-up in basis and stuff, you can still get the permanent exclusion. So if you make an investment in 2028, and then you hold it 10 years till 2038, and actually the regs have said you could hold it as long as 2048, you still get that benefit.
All right, we're going to go over here.
Thank you for the very clear explanation. We've been working a little bit on opportunity zones with health, and one of the questions we get a lot that I just wanted to make sure was clarified was whether there would be new tracks ever designated or whether they are fixed and set, and now that they have been permanently designated as of 2018.
Lots of people are asking that common question. Congressman yesterday that was asking that question. It will take an act of Congress. It is in the statute that these are the tracks and they cannot change. That's it. But again, nothing would prevent Congress from acting on it. I think it is important as we think about these tracks, and the reason we put out some track level data in advance was try to influence governors to make the right choices. And what we've tried to do is discourage them initially from making the choices of zones that already had received a ton of investment. So there's a zone adjacent to Central Park that is eligible because it's got a bunch of public housing. This is New York City, right? But the median home price in that tract is $2 million. In Brooklyn, there is a tract where the median home value is just under the bridge is $1.3 million. In Central Berkeley, I know we have Berkeley both, there is a tract adjacent to Cal Berkeley where, again, some students so qualified on the basis that the qualification was largely poverty and median income, but the median home value is over $1 million. Contrast that with a zone in Youngstown where the median home price is $14,000. And you get a sense of the diversity of zones. And all of the zones across the country have that same incentive. And so it's not like the one in Youngstown has a more incentive than the one next to So when we think about where the capital is going, and why some people are questioning whether they made the right selections with respect to the zones, I expect that we will see some zones get a lot of investment. The kind of zones where, so in DC, historic Anacostia was selected. That's a community where the median income is $35,000 in the area, in an area where the median income is $105,000. And so that's an area just over the bridge that is going to be is already facing rapid appreciation pressures. That's where the most gains are created. So that's where the most capital is going to go. If we're in a community like Youngstown, where it's had over 20% population loss just since the year 2000, it's harder to imagine real estate assets in particular appreciating. So that was a long answer to your question.
No, so we get that question a lot so far. So.
Next, the gentleman from Connecticut has a question.
I just had a related question. With census tracts being redrawn after the 2020 census, just following up on Daniel's question, are you seeing like interest in that just so developers can sort of like, gerrymander their land into the census tract equipment?
That's a great question. I have actually not seen the community grapple with how eligibility would be affected by redrawn boundaries. So I expect Treasury will have to make some comment, which might be using the initial boundaries. I don't know. It's a good question.
In the absence of a government role that is focused on outcomes, is there a national network being developed outside of government to think about outcomes and to create an advocacy and information network?
It's not that no one is thinking about that. And there are some things that people can do, but it's challenging to think through exactly how. So, mechanistically, so both of the public comments that we've put in we're addressing the issue of what data the federal government should be collected. But what they're anticipating right now is that the data collection will be on the tax form itself. I think that's problematic because there are legal prohibitions against sharing information on tax forms, especially transaction level information. We have access right now to transaction level information about every markets project, every low-income housing tax credit, every small business administration loan guarantee. That's what I want for opportunity zones. And if they don't collect that information, or if they collect it on the tax form, I struggle to think that we're going to get that information back. So there are people who have put in public comments. Senator Scott and Booker have put in a new bill that would require more robust reporting at a transaction level. I don't think it goes all the way towards what I want to see in terms of it's still being collected on the tax form, and they haven't committed to releasing detailed data on the back end to the public. So to answer your question maybe more directly, we may not know where this investment goes. And absent that, it's hard to create an information campaign. There's things cities could do to try to track investment via a building permit application, for example. That doesn't help for things that are not, more investments in operating businesses. But this could be somewhat of a black box for us.
First, thank you. It's the clearest explanation of opportunity zones I've ever heard. But just a clarifying question, and then a question about that. So these are not just tax havens. This is also an investment with a return, because it's an equity investment. So you're getting return back on your money depending on how the price of the equity goes up. Okay, and then my related question is there any regulation or stipulation about what that rate of return is? I mean, I understand that it's the, whatever that equity is, but is there like a percentage that's standard, or it's really just?
Yes. My OZ 2.0 concept would be that there's some cap on subsidy dollar amount that's actually created or given away in terms of the federal tax revenue. I mean, also keep in mind, the use case here, I would like the use case to include things like affordable housing, things like federal qualified health centers, charter schools, community facilities, what have you. But those things we don't want to appreciate and have to buy back at 3 times the price in 10 years. So I'm sitting on the board of the Douglas Community Land Trust in DC, and we were trying to make the numbers work, and it looks like if you have an investor that's willing to take a 5% return rather than a 15% return, which is a big impact investor haircut right there. But if you can get that, and you can add another big subsidy to the project, like new market tax credits. If both of those conditions are met, and you add in opportunity zones that will leave cash in the deal in a positive way, and you'll be able to buy out the investor in 10 years and produce value for them and still get more cash in for you. But those are the kind of scenarios it's going to take to be able to produce cash into a deal that we don't want to rapidly appreciate in price. But there's no restrictions, and this very much is tied to appreciation on the back end. So investors are actively looking for properties, and if you go and do any Google search or any business conference or whatever, they will say, these are the top 10 cities or the top 10 zones where we expect the most appreciation, so that is the best place to put your opportunity zone money.
Very cool. Thank you very much, Brett. And the thing can you tell me a little bit more, Brett, as far as what you see on, what either locally or national, like what the philanthropic community's been doing around this stuff? How do you see them coalescing?
Great, thank you. It's a good question. This is my filling in for Aaron question. He had a medical issue, couldn't be here today. But we have been following and kitchen cabineting with Kreisky Foundation and the work that they've been doing. They and Rockefeller, as they are taking a leading role nationally in trying to experiment with this. So they have committed combined $50 million to create opportunity funds that have a missional purpose behind them. They're trying to do things that will produce more benefit to communities. And the money that the foundations are contributing is not so much the money that will be directly invested, but it is the de-risking money. It is the guarantee, the loss reserve, to try to act as a buffer to get more confidence as people consider what an interest rate they're willing to take. If there's less risk, they'll be willing to take a lower return for that. And so we have seen a couple of foundations move out nationally, but that's still, a grain of sand in the beach of what investment will be. And there have been some smaller and local foundations that have given thought to convening local conversations. But we have yet to see the broader philanthropic field come up with a more unified or global or articulated agenda around what needs to be done with respect to this program.
No, I appreciate the perspective. So for those of you that don't know, RISE is primarily an affordable housing developer in addition to being a CDFI and community organization engaging the community here and all this stuff. So when we look at things like that, we look at organizations like the NCSHA, which is the National Council of State Housing Agencies, and their website maintains a list of opportunities from partners. And they're saying, we've got lots and lots of investment. Please, 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 somebody help us to try to find projects that we can funnel this money into, either because, as somebody mentioned, it's also kind of a tax haven, also an investment opportunity, lots of stuff going on that may or may not be taking place in distressed communities or downtowns or whatever the situation is. But I think that what everybody wants to know, right, as data intermediaries, is how do they fit into all this? What's the role that they can play in kind of shaping how all this stuff is told in a story to the general public? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can maybe give our experience, what we tried to do in Chicago. Back in January, there was an event convened by a number of local foundations. Brett actually was there and presented a similar presentation on background on opportunities. And I think that was a really important event in the sense that I'm sure a lot of folks here have questions about it. It's a very complicated program. A lot of folks in Chicago, both from the investment community, from the policy community, from the community-based organization sector, had a lot of questions about this and what the things that consistently came up in a lot of the questions, a lot of the conversations was this issue of displacement. And is this a program because it's a place-based incentive to attract market investment essentially to low-income neighborhoods? How is that going to drive potentially lost affordability in those neighborhoods? So we just for our own internal education purposes at IHS took some mapping project we've been doing looking at displacement pressure in Chicago and mapped that against opportunity zones in the city to see what is the alignment of the city's designated opportunity zones versus sort of market pressure that might drive loss affordability already in place, not necessarily what might become from the opportunity zone investments. So what we found in Chicago, at least, was that the way that the opportunity zones have been designated largely allocated those tracks to low-income neighborhoods that had low market value, essentially real estate. The area that you want to attract new investment to, about 80% of the census tracts in Chicago, we flagged as sort of low risk of immediate displacement due to rising housing costs. There was a very small number of census tracts, 3, that we had high value. These were areas that were adjacent to the downtown. Not actually highly residential, so they were areas that were more either medical district or former industrial space or abandoned hospital site just south of the Loop. And there was another smaller group of tracts, a little bit larger group of tracts that were sort of in this middle area, about 20 or so, near south side, near west side, that we thought might be potentially where there might be some legitimate vulnerability to shorter-term displacement. Opportunity zones did attract a lot of investment to those areas. So that was sort of one way that we tried to help at least wrap our minds around how this might play out in the city, and help raise awareness of that relationship. As Brett mentioned, every city is a little different, and the way they've been designated is a little different. So I do think an important role for network partners is just to help articulate and understand what opportunities look like in their cities.
So while we're trying to figure out what they look like in our cities, the big question, again, is like, what are the indicators that we need to be looking at? And Brett gave us a really good dream indicator, right? Like if every city's building permit process had like a little checkbox, like is this an opportunity zone fund investment, it would be really, really easy for us to do. I don't think any cities are doing that right now. If you know differently, I'd love to hear it. And in the meantime, maybe this is something we can do as far as leaning on people in our cities and our communities to say, hey, if we really want to know if this stuff is working, if we want to have success stories or lessons learned or whatever it might be, we need to start collecting this data. This is a really easy way to do it that's going to help everybody out. But what do you see, Jeff, from the work that you've done in Chicago, around what are either like the real live indicators that people can start working on now that are going to be beneficial for tracking opportunities on fund investment, or what are some of these other kind of dream indicators for it would be really easy to know what was going on if we had this data, and then hopefully some folks in the audience can be empowered to start making some conversations like that.
So just in talking to folks about how a group like IHS can be useful in the opportunity zone space, I guess, we talked to some folks who have opportunity funds, some folks who are trying to attract investments, some folks who are just trying to understand what the program looks like, and I think each one might have different perspectives on the data that can be useful. On the investor side, most of them are probably going to be profit motivated in some way, but there are some who are emphasizing impact. In Chicago, we've got a bank who's created an opportunity fund, and they're trying to leverage CRA credit as another incentive to invest in low moderate income areas or to investments that are aligned with CRA. So for them, understanding the relationship between a proposed investment and CRA credit would be a data point that's obviously low moderate income neighborhoods, benefits to low moderate income households or communities. We also talked to a community-based organization who was trying to attract an investment to their neighborhood, and that failed mainly because it was an affordable housing investment that just wasn't going to make any money essentially, because affordable housing is not really going to get a return. What we've been hearing, the types of investments, even from the CRA-focused financial institution, was really around what they call workforce housing, so housing affordable up to 120% of the AMI. That's where they were seeing potential opportunities to invest even in low moderate income areas. So the data for those community partners would be how to maybe contribute to a prospectus or some type of pitch that they would make to a funder, to an investor on why there may be a return, or especially more to the impact investor side. How can this lead to some impact, and then in the back end, how to evaluate that impact. We have a certain bias in the place that studies real estate and housing on market value, and real estate value is really a great indicator of what's happening in a neighborhood. So that's one indicator that you would track, I think, just to understand. It's hard to maybe tie it directly to a specific investment, but you could track opportunity zones in general, because it's possible that the investment itself might not generate a lot of change, but just broader interest in investing in those places might generate some type of change in demand for housing or demand for real estate. Those are a couple of ideas.
Fantastic. Brett, do you have anything to add based on your experience in the district?
I think just to say that the way that we have traditionally tracked and thought about investment has been very bank-centric, and that will not work very well here. So banks largely have earned income, not capital gains. So they are not the ones who are going to be making these. They may be creating funds and managing other people's money, but they are not the ones with the gains principally. And so who has gains? And it's a struggle for CDFIs, it's a struggle for CDCs and affordable housing developers. There's not natural connections. There's not a rich set of networks that are already built from high net worth individuals and the corporations who have gains with the people who want to do good in communities. And so from a tracking perspective, it's harder because we have reporting mechanisms in place for banks. Imperfect, but we have some. But equity investments from high net worth individuals, what do we have there? So yes, you can track investments into land a lot easier than operating businesses. That's a minimum that could be done. It is somewhat of a paradigm shift, though, I would say, to put a capital source on a building permit application. A lot of building permit applications don't have a capital source. And OZs could be 5% of the capital stack of a project. Is that the only one we're going to ask about? Are we also interested in any of the others? Why? I mean, OZs are interesting, they're important, but are they the only interesting and important thing? So I think there are some real decisions that we need to make thoughtfully about what we want to know about investment in our community.
And we have to be thoughtful about it, even though, as you said, the clock's kind of ticking on all this stuff to get some of these projects off the ground and see the realization of the gains and all that stuff within only a handful of years. So it's a challenge for everybody that's involved in this process as we're trying to essentially build the house while we're learning how to make and build a house. And it's something that really doesn't have a whole lot of institutional knowledge, like was said. And you are one step ahead of the game, good sir, because I'm just about to turn things over to the audience. So questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, struggles, questions in your communities, or if you have another answer or addendum to the something we just got from these two fine gentlemen, and you say this is a great indicator that I'd love to see. So we got number 1 over here, number 2 over here, number 3 over here.
To either of you, what role do you see land trusts playing in setting up this network?
We've tried to figure that out for the Douglas Community Land Trust. I think there could be a role that land banks play to push property into market, especially because you could help ease the ability of a project to qualify if you can get lands cheaply into a development use. Land trusts are hard, community land trusts, because we don't want the property to appreciate. We don't want to have to buy it back. So I don't see this as a program that is on its, in its most straightforward way, very amenable to preservation of affordable housing.
And just to the extent that I would agree, but the extent that if affordability is a concern, not just related to opportunity zones, but related to all sorts of other investments happening in cities, so just to the extent that land trusts are potentially a vehicle to preserve affordability in an area that might be a risk.
So our tracks are set for better or worse. The City of Columbus is really high resourced and has a good handle on the tracks in the City of Columbus. Our role is to support other communities throughout our region, so a lot of small cities, even rural areas, and we've been trying to kind of inform them on the process, and I'm curious, what are one or two things that less resourced communities that we could provide new data or strategies to them to make their zones more competitive for investment?
There's a lot of things that the public sector is considering doing, either in the prevention of displacement space, or also in the how to entice and attract. Because I think, I don't know the numbers, but I think half of zones could get nothing under this incentive. So there's a lot of attention about the places that will get a lot, and perhaps driven by where media and other folks live is the high cost markets, and so we spend a lot of time thinking about the highest cost markets. And I'm not saying we shouldn't think about those, but I think the neighborhoods that are not appreciating could get passed by and see no new investment coming from this incentive. So one thing that there are lots of things that localities are considering, states and localities are considering in terms of how to structure their approach to opportunity zones. And so just ticking through very quickly a couple of them. We have seen states set forward to align their own state capital gains taxation rules with the federal ones. My personal comment there is I'm not 100% opposed to that if you're going to get something out of it other than what we have right now. So California has said, Governor Newsom has said, for example, we will do that, but only for projects that create affordable housing or clean energy. Now, that may be not the same priorities to the folks we're talking about in Cleveland, but maybe they're more the jobs emphasis. But anyways, so that's a tool that states have in their arsenal. There's also the use of public lands and the ability to push land into use cases. And there's absolutely, in the same way philanthropy can do this, the ability to de-risk projects. And so, again, investors might accept a lower return if they're more certain what that risk, if that risk is going to be less. So that can come in the form of grants or guarantees, loss reserves, credit enhancements. Certainly, there's co-investment needed in terms of workforce development and skill building and transportation and infrastructure that the public sector can be doing alongside to try to create an investment that's coming, A, and B, to make that investment actually have benefit for communities. There's also a potential role, a thoughtful one, but around reduced regulatory burden, hasten permitting, alignment of existing programs, tax increment financing, conditional zoning, etc. I will also say that some localities are working more on the marketing and information piece of this, and so they've created what I, not dismissively, I'm thinking of as like matchmakers or birth coaches to try to help people come together and get a project done. And so there's examples we can point to. Baltimore has one, and Alabama has one for the state. The Rockefeller Foundation is going to be supporting chief operating opportunity zone officers in the city, in a handful of cities across the country. And so there's an effort to connect buyers and investors. I will say my hint of cynicism there is real estate development happens all the time across this country, and this again will be a part of a capital stack, potentially a small part. And so it's a little, to me, tail wagging the dog to think everything about how real estate investment is going to change on the basis of this incentive. But nevertheless, I see cities all the time now. We have our opportunity zone prospectus, and it's a glossy, shiny thing, and they want to advertise deals that can be done. And so we're going to see some of that, maybe some of it work, maybe some of it won't.
See, that's a great side hustle idea. Opportunity zone match.com. Right, so we'll take that building what's out of it. Right over here, Jenna.
Actually, I think Brett covered a decent amount of it, but some of the indicators that we're obviously really interested in at the Urban Health Collaborative are the health outcomes and some of the neighborhood impacts that can either positively or negatively impact health. You've spoken a bit about some of the housing and displacement, some of those negative ones. I was originally going to ask kind of about public pairing of public investments for health resources that we also know impact often housing values, things like greenways and trails, and whether cities are, well, it's twofold. Whether cities intentionally try to, recommend zones that were near some of the places that they already have these incentives going in place, and whether cities are now starting to put in some of these new healthy amenities, whether it's transit or, or parks near places that have been designated.
So I can just speak to what we see in Chicago. Definitely in Chicago, there were a couple of zones that were designated because of strategic location of properties that have been abandoned or vacant for a while that they wanted to redevelop near transit. And a lot of there were a number of sites near transit. But I don't know if there was an intentional effort to pair it with other investments necessarily, or other existing open spaces or green spaces. And in Chicago, the vast majority are in really low-income areas, and I think there's a question about whether or not any investment will flow there immediately at least. And all the chatter you hear in the media or just from other people who are doing this work is that most of the interest is really in a smaller group of census tracts that have near the city, and probably would have attracted investment anyways. This is another incentive. The one type of investment that we've heard that is actually targeted to low-income area is a data center, which has led, that really went to a displacement risk and live to a data center. So that was one type of investment that has been paired with opportunity zones that is happening in the low-income area. It doesn't really get at the issue of public health at all.
And that really speaks to one of the biggest criticisms of the program, right? Is that you took all the new market tax credit areas and said, well, anything that's next to it is eligible. So we have a lot of very high need areas and also a lot of downtowns that are more than likely attracting investment anyway, right?
I was just going to underscore that point entirely. Chicago, we were pretty close to Chicago in their selection process, and I feel like by and large they made the right choices. Not entirely, but much greater degree than other cities. And Portland, Seattle, Houston. I mean, you look at the map of those zones, and it's like, what was happening there? I mean, they pick large swaths of places that are either at risk or have already rapidly changed, and so it is so local. And you'll get other cities where it almost wouldn't matter what zone they pick. If it's not appreciating, it's not going to be that attractive at all. So there's a mix.
So we're going to go question over here in the back, and then the gentleman right up front. As we're listening to this stuff and they're getting the microphones ready, I want you guys to think about what kinds of concerns have there been in the communities around this, if anything. If there's any kind of talk around where the zones were designated or not, and what kind of problems or solutions it might bring, and things like that. What do you got for us?
And actually, that's not perfect. My question was fantastic. What kind of conversations have you had with community organizations who either are trying to educate their communities about their opportunities on designation? What things are they worried about? What ways have you been able to kind of share information with them to kind of bolster that education process? And what ways can we be advocates to prevent this potential gentrification, displacement risk, and educate community organizations or activists who may be supplying grassroots pressure?
So actually, we've actually talked to community-based folks who want to participate in opportunity zones and figure out how to be involved in the process or attract investments, and that's through just data support in some ways, but also just educating on the market conditions and needs in the community. If that's the one way that we've tried to support community-based folks. I mean, there is a concern around displacement that has come up pretty frequently, but I think at the moment at least, folks are trying to figure out how to, at least all the folks we've talked to want to figure out how to attract investment that are aligned with their needs. So helping them make that case, tell that story, I think is a big part of the role that we can play.
I've seen a range of reactions as we've been talking about this. Some of the reactions, absolutely present, of course, in all types of communities, including the most disinvested, are how do I get my share? How do I get some? Who's a high net worth individual that I can connect with? Who do I go to for more information? So there's definitely that strand. There's also a strand that says, we have a scenario where Hispanics are 16% of adults, Blacks are 13% of adults in this country, but the share of small businesses owned by them are 6% and 4%, and the share of small business receipts, revenues, are 2% and 1% of all small business revenues and ownership structures. And so there's a sense of, well, can this work? helping entrepreneurs and small businesses of color get capital because they're more likely located in some of these zones. And so on the one hand, that feels like, yay, there actually could be some benefit from this. But the conversation that I'm having around this is, wait, this is an equity tool. What does it mean to give up an equity share in my business? And do I need to sell my business in order to make that work? And I'm not sure I do want to engage in that. So equity is an attractive tool for some entrepreneurs that want to sell their business or sell a share of ownership in their business. But that's not the case necessarily for a lot of individuals. And then there's also, I think we've discussed already, but just some people just a real fear around rising pressures. And this is another dose of kerosene to an already attractive environment. And I think the thing I come back to here is cities in particular don't have very focused levels of or areas of control around this incentive. You can't really regulate around a capital source, but they have influence. So Boulder, for example, has prohibited new permit activity in a few zones that are market rate, in a few zones where they're worried about rapid appreciation. That's not prohibiting opportunity zone investment, it's just slowing investment. So that's a tool that could be used for locals that are concerned about this. On the other hand, I had a conversation with a city council member in Minneapolis who said in response to that Boulder example, we're liberal, but we're not that liberal. We're not going to stop investment into our city. And so every tool comes with its own consequence and cost as well. And so that's some of the challenges that we're hearing in communities as we talk about this.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's something that we've been wrestling with in St. Louis as well. Because a lot of our education has been around not just the people that got the zone designation and trying to explain what that means and how you might be able to leverage it, but a lot of people really felt slighted that where they live was not designated as an opportunity zone. And they come up and they say, well, President Trump has decided that there's no opportunity here. What do we do about that? And we've had to do a lot of work as far as changing the tone of the conversation and kind of resetting how people look at this in a way so that we can kind of move forward with the tools that are available and not get hung up on things that somebody arbitrarily decided did or didn't kind of make sense. Right here.
Thank you again. I think like several other people said, this is one of the clearest explanations I've seen of this. So it's really helpful. You talked a lot about real estate examples and how it's sort of dominated by real estate. You just mentioned one example that's not real estate with small businesses. Are there other examples that you've seen that you think are either promising or worth further exploration that are realistic, that are outside real estate?
I would ask an addendum onto that, and I wish I remembered this off the top of my head, but there are uses that are excluded under the opportunity zone clause, right? You can't just invest in anything. There's a handful of stuff that you can't do. Do either one of you remember what those are? I know there's like things like adult-oriented uses and things like that that are kind of like exclusionary zoning kind of stuff, but you can't just invest in anything and then have it work. So I think it's good to frame that conversation by saying, this is what you can't do, and then move forward with the stuff that you can do. Okay?
You can do almost anything. There's a prohibition against what are traditionally called the sin businesses that are referenced in the New Markets Code. So alcohol establishments, nightclubs, beer manufacturing, that kind of thing. Golf courses are in the mix as well. So that apart from a few of those things, you can invest in any business type. So examples of other businesses, they're just starting to come together. So there was a lot of concern among people interested in operating business investments that the prohibitions around how much income needed to be derived and assets held in a zone would prevent most businesses from wanting to take advantage of this. Similarly, as it was initially conceptualized, most venture capital doesn't want to wait 10 years. They want to exit when the company is ready to sell. And if that's year 7, you don't want to wait for year 10. That might not be the point where you're getting the best price for your investment. So there's been some things that the regs have helped with to make it more attractive to do investment in operating businesses. So I think we're going to see more of that coming forward, but it's kind of, those regs just came out a couple weeks ago, and so it's starting to firm.
And to give you guys a comparison, 7 years is about the time it takes for a strip mall investor to get their money back on the strip mall investment. Everything after that is pure profit. to give you a little bit of a mental time frame of how things kind of line up with what the investors are seeing. The gentleman from Texas, I believe, had a question.
Brett, you mentioned sort of like a lofty OZ perspective as a tool that a mayor might have or something. I was wondering if there's any indication from local governments that they might use that as an opportunity to recapture local revenue by maybe not offering property tax abatements. Is that, I mean, is there any indication that those are, that it's a tool that can be used that way?
Bringing it back around to the comments about how this could be combined with TIF, right?
I see the opposite. I see more conversations around how we can entice even more out of this. And sometimes that's maybe more in a revenue neutral way here rather than there. So one example that I don't like as well is South Carolina added a point to their QAP, the application plan for LIHTC, if you're in an opportunity zone. My reflection is why. I would like LIHTCs to be located in affluent communities. I would like, from a fair housing perspective, to not concentrate, affordable housing in the most disinvested communities, but also acknowledging that there's a range of zones, and so, even within zones, we want to not prioritize all zones equally to locate my housing tax credit developments in. But whether it's that at a state level or a city local level, I see more people saying, now that that exists, we have to chase after it with even more money. Part of me also wonders, actually, how non-zones will be affected. So 44% of the nation's census tracts were not zones, to the extent that now people are moving across the street, and this is a zone, and that wasn't. I think cities need to think carefully, counties need to think carefully around, just because this happened to get picked and this didn't, doesn't mean that we need to necessarily put a lot of extra emphasis there. That said, I am aware that, if you could add a little something and the deal could actually happen because the investor could get this benefit here, maybe that would be a good idea.
So I had a couple conversations around this sort of thing this morning. Does anybody in the room have examples of opportunity zone projects that have already kind of come to fruition? The gentleman from Connecticut shared one with me this morning, where, what was it, Marco? Wendy's, that is now fully operational as an opportunity zone project? Anybody have anything else that they've heard that is kind of along those lines?
In Philadelphia, we have a tract that butts up next to a tract that is already receiving a lot of investment, and there was, at least what I have heard, is that there was
a building right in Philadelphia. There's a tract that's our tracts are very small. Is the first thing. I think that one piece that the geographers maybe can lend is that the designation of these things will change by spatial scale too. But so our tracts are very small, and next to each other there was a tract that was that's highly developing very quickly, and was supposed to have some big new investment, and it just moved across the street to the other side of the street, so that it's in an opportunity zone. I believe they broke ground in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So that's happening a lot, at least in Philadelphia. It's like the narrative that we're hearing.
Yeah, Memphis had one that really proves a lot of what Brett said. It was Opportunity Zones running capital stack of about a $900 million redevelopment project that was right down the street from our baseball stadium downtown. Probably would have happened with or without OZs, but OZs made it more possible probably for that last money in maybe. But yeah, pretty big impact.
Somebody can beat me to this, but I want to make a wall calendar that's like the stadiums of opportunity zones. So universities of opportunity zones. There's a lot of stadiums.
Hospitals. You mean hospitals?
Well, that speaks to one of the criticisms of stadiums, right? They always say there's going to be lots of development, lots of stuff that's going to happen, and it ends up being a sea of parking lots. So maybe this is the tool that helps developers realize their progress. I really like the point that you brought up, Jana, and something that I'd like to turn over to the panel here is that what does this mean as far as framing the overall conversation about the way that all of our cities talk about this, and the way that we have conversations with partners and funders and the general public. So what can we do as data intermediaries to have a really strong role in that? How can we help facilitate these conversations? how do we turn these into conversations so it's not about what exactly is or isn't happening with quote-unquote opportunity zone fund investment, but what does it mean for the overall reinvestment of communities?
So we do a lot of work just tracking neighborhood conditions, be it housing market or other economic conditions, and working with neighborhood groups and others to understand that and apply that information to their work. Displacement pressure, market pressure has constantly been a topic that people are concerned about and talk about, regardless of opportunity zones. So for us, it's sort of another potential risk or an issue to talk about that comes up in these conversations. And it's an issue to be educated on and understand. And so it's another layer of that discussion in terms of the work that we do.
So with that in mind, I'm going to turn everything back over to you guys. Is there any other pressing questions or concerns or things that you've heard that you feel like we really want to wrap up while we're here today? Everyone's just kind of letting all of that seep in and ruminate. So what I will do is I will ask, does anybody in the room, Leia's got a question or something? Rob's got something.
I just wondered to follow up on that, if maybe, Brett, you can talk a little bit more about investments overall in neighborhoods and how we can do a better job about tracking all investment flows, not just the opportunity zones, but really trying to have a broader conversation about how we invest in communities.
Great. Thanks, Leah. I've been doing a body of work that has looked at how capital is flowing to communities. And we put out a feature on Chicago a couple of weeks ago. We also did work in Baltimore, Detroit, and the Twin Cities, and also some nationwide work. And so there's certainly the data sources you all know and can access, like FFIEC, CRA data for some small business lending, HMDA, Home Mortgage Disclosure Act for some loan data. You probably have access to building permit data and sales information in your cities. But we have been doing more to try to track and capture lending to multifamily properties and to commercial properties by some proprietary data that are allowing us to understand that better, as well as looking at other types of investments. So obviously the stuff that's tied to real estate is easier to track than the stuff that is small business. But we have also been working to inventory where the public sector money is going spatially, which has required at times, this is the work you all do, so you know it, but getting 400-page long PDFs and trying to digitize them because the city department doesn't know where it spends its planning and real estate development money. So that's the sort of work that we'll be up to and that you guys can all be doing in your cities. And we've got a landing page that I'd be happy to share of where our capital flows work lives.
Fantastic, thank you, Brett. Anybody else have any other additional questions, comments, concerns? Not hearing anything, I'd like to pose a question to the audience. Who here is actively doing work around opportunity zones right now as far as either tracking it, keeping an eye on it, seeing what's going on? A handful of us, in addition to the folks that are up here on the table, some people sheepishly raising their hands. I understand it's a little bit of a contentious point. For anyone that's in the audience who want to learn more about this, it's a lot of stuff, it's very nuanced, it's very bizarre. We're also trying to wrap our heads around it. So look and see who raised their hands. Feel free to reach out to any of us that are up here, any of the folks that are out there, and let's try to see what we can do to work through this together quite a bit. And camp session?
There's a camp session posted this afternoon if people want.
There is a camp session posted this afternoon. If people want to get really, really into it and a little bit more intimate setting with all this stuff. And with that in mind, Leia, if there's no objections, I think we're good to break, right?
Yeah, well, first off, do you think that can help?
Yeah,